to the Weird Warriors podcast. I'm Max.
I'm Rich.
And on this podcast, we normally cover the Weird War Tales comic book series published by DC Comics from 1971 to 1983. However, on this episode, we're going down south and we're taking a look at Jonah Hex number 37 from 1980. But first, Rich has a little something to say to you.
Just the intel report. Steel, Elseworlds Annual Number 1 from DC Comics in July 1994. Written by John and Judy Bogdanov, penciled by Humberto Ramos, inked by a whole slew of people. John Henry's childhood friend becomes an oppressive plantation owner. As the Civil War begins, conditions at the plantation worsen, and John Henry forms the steel armor to fight back and lead his people to freedom. Elseworlds is DC's version of What If. And yeah, this was a tough read in a 21st century setting, even from something that was made in the late 90s. The N-bomb got dropped in one panel. Brutal whippings, murder, not a relaxing read, but then it shouldn't be, should it? Still, it was good stuff, all things considered. This was a solid read. Cover detail. Art by Luis Dominguez, 40 cents. Jonah Hex is yellow on white. With a huge blood-red sun in the sky, Jonah flings himself out of a canoe towards a rocky outcropping as it goes over a tall waterfall. A banner above the title reads, "A secret page of history revealed when Jonah meets Stonewall Jackson." A second text block at the bottom of the cover reads, "When Jonah made this fateful leap, he never guessed it could well have been the reason the South lost the war." Cover date, June 1980. Date of release, March 11th, 1980. Old Comics Man. Seen on eBay for anywhere between $3 and $50. No Killjoy, CNC. LD in the house. We saw the last of Luis Dominguez in our own WWT book already, so it's just nifty to see him here. The blood-red sun reflects on the water at the top of the waterfall, water splashing off the rocks. The canoe is still going straight ahead off the waterfall, water streaming off of it, which gives you an idea of how fast the water is flowing. The trees on the far bank is a nice detail. Jonah bug-eyed, losing his hat as he dives for the rock. This is a beautiful cover. Nice to see you again, Luis.
Hey, 'tis the season for surprises. Not only did I not expect to be covering this issue of Jonah Hex today, or any appearance of Jonah Hex at all, but I certainly didn't imagine that I would also be getting a chance to appraise yet another cover rendered by our very own beloved WWT alumni, Mr. Luis Dominguez himself. I agree that this is an outstanding piece of work, slightly hobbled only by the awkward text box near the bottom of the image. I mean, I guess in the context of this story, as you'll soon hear, it makes sense, but I just don't find it compelling. Since, well, aren't we glad that the South lost the war? But I'll get to all of that later. Still, heck of an image. I just wish it was dressed a little better. They just left it at the he meets Stonewall Jackson. Like Rich said, it's got the action, it's got the dynamism, the composition, the coloring, everything you expect from an excellent Luis Dominguez cover. So, good start, in my opinion.
Title detail. This series of Jonah Hex ran for 92 issues between March-April 1977 to August 1985. The character was created by writer John Albano and artist Tony De Zuniga. Jonah Hex previously appeared in All-Star Western 10 and 11, then the immediately renamed Weird Western Tales 12 to 14 and 16 to 38, leaving the book when he got his own title. He's appeared in several miniseries, regular series, and a few animated and film projects. I had Sam Glanzman sign my Jonah Hex Two-Gun Mojo graphic novel collection, and Jimmy Palmiotti and Justin Gray signed an issue 1 reboot from January 2006. I bought all those awesome DC Vertigo minis and corrected Wikipedia's Jonah Hex entry to give Glanzman credit for working on them, and met Hex writer Tim Truman at Sam's funeral service. So here we go. Stonewall, 17 pages. Script by Michael Fleischer, pencils by Dick Ayers, inks by Danny Bulanati. Two favorites of the show. Well, technically three. Synopsis. Autumn leaves blow through a church graveyard. An old bearded man leans on a shovel with his grandson and watches from a distance as a hideously scarred man takes off his hat and pays his respects in front of a stone marker with a small Confederate flag flying in front of it. The boy points. Granddad, that man over there, isn't he Jonah Hex, the famous gunfighter? That's right, boy. That's who it is, all right. Jonah Hex drops by here every time he's in these parts to pay his respects to the man who's buried in that there grave. Who's that, Granddad? Well, his real name was General Thomas Jonathan Jackson, but pretty near the entire country knew him as Stonewall. Stonewall Jackson! You're hardly old enough to remember the war between the states, youngster, but next to wily old Robert E. Lee himself, Stonewall Jackson was the toughest, smartest, bravest general in the Confederate States America ever had to its name. Of course, Jonah Hex fought for the Southland too, and the way I hear tell it, he fought like a wildcat. But of course, Hex was only a young lieutenant, not a big important general like Stonewall Jackson, and the two men probably never would have even met if it hadn't been for one day while Hex was out scouting a site for a possible ambush. Flashback. Jonah Hex surveys the countryside through binoculars from a hilltop. The Union 3rd Cavalry gonna have to ride through this canyon on the way to water, which means this would make a mighty fine spot to... Uh-oh. He focuses his binoculars on 5 Yankee cavalrymen pursuing a lone Southerner on horseback. Looks like some poor Southern boy has went and stirred himself up a hornet's nest full of riled-up Yankees. Yankee fire rips through the Southerner's shoulder and sends him tumbling off his horse, and the Yankees close in to collect their prize. Hex opens fire and drops 2 of them from their saddles. The other 3 dismount, take cover behind their horses, and return fire as Hex comes galloping down the hill, shooting. Hex's horse is hit, and he tumbles to the ground. A much smaller target now, Hex's fire is lethal, and he quickly dispatches the 3 remaining bluecoats. Moments later, the Southerner approaches Hex, clutching his wound. I'm much obliged to you, soldier. I was scouting our enemy artillery emplacements over by the river, and I'm afraid I latched on to a little more Yankee trouble than I was prepared to handle. Don't mention it, friend. I was glad I could help out. Now, maybe you could better let me have a look at... What? Them stars you're wearing. You're a general? That's right, Lieutenant. Jackson's the name. General Stonewall Jackson. Hex snaps on the salute. Lieutenant Jonah Hex, sir, 7th Confederate Cavalry. It's an honor to meet you, sir. Jackson returns the salute. That is, Lieutenant. In point of fact, it's really I should be saluting you. If it hadn't been for you, I'd be pushing up daisies right now instead of just standing here nursing a punctured up shoulder. Now, if you'll just climb aboard one of them Yankee horses, you can ride back to my field headquarters. I'll have this arm of mine looked at, and then maybe you and I can do some talking. How about it? A short time later, Jackson has his arm in a sling, and the 2 men stand over a map at HQ. I'll get right to the point, Lieutenant. General Lee has instructed me to capture the Federal Armory at Harper's Ferry, here, and then rejoin his forces at South Mountain for what seems to be shaping up as a major engagement with some 70,000 Union troops commanded by General George B. McClellan. Unless emergency reinforcements come to the aid of the Harper's Ferry garrison, I should have no difficulty. And that, Lieutenant Hex, is where you come in. I need one man, one courageous man, to help me isolate the armory by dynamiting this bridge over the Potomac River. Now, both sides of the river are crawling with Federals, but I have a plan as to how you might slip past them. I'm told you've spent some time among the Indians. Is that correct? I spent some time with them, yes, sir. Well, that's just wonderful, Lieutenant. Tell me, how would you like to go on leave from your cavalry unit for a while and maybe go on a little canoe trip? And so, Jonah Hex soon finds himself paddling a canoe down a raging river. Go on a little canoe trip, he says. Ha! Current's so strong in this part of the river, the water's practically boiling. And them rocks are so raised and sharp, a man could probably shave his whiskers on the edges of them. He gasps when the current suddenly snaps his paddle in two. Well, thank you, Jeff Davis, for providing me with this fine canoeing equipment. Because the only worst predicament that could happen to me right now would be if that there turned out to be some kind of obstacle in this here stretch of river that wasn't marked on the general's campaign map. Like maybe he gasps again when he hears a familiar, distant roar. Waterfall? Paddleless, Hex is helpless and is thrown clear of his canoe as he's swept over the falls. I'll have to remember to inform the general about this scintillating experience next time him and me get together for some bourbon and branch water. Surfacing, he sees the bridge Jackson had sent him to destroy and starts swimming underwater towards it with his satchel full of dynamite. Which reminds me of another thing we're going to have to tell the general next time I see him. Stonewall, I'm going to say. I don't mind fighting the war for you single-handed, but I'm a man what's got deep-rooted religious objections to swimming. Hex attaches the charge to the bridge's supports and is lighting the fuse when an alert Union sentry sees him. Hey, you! What are you doing there? Hex pulls a knife out of his shirt collar and throws it into the sentry's chest as he raises his rifle. Hex dives deep, and the bridge explodes. Later, at General Jackson's encampment, the two men shake hands and say farewell. Moving out now, Lieutenant Hex. You'll be rejoining your own outfit. But before you go, I want to congratulate you personally on a dangerous job well done. Come the end of the war, you come visit me, yeah? The Confederate States of America will have a place for a man like you. And besides, you're the kind of man I'd be proud to call my friend. I will, sir. And thank you again, sir.
And so, Jonah Hex returned to his own cavalry unit, and in the months that followed, he and his men saw action in some of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. He had no further contact with Stonewall Jackson after that. He was not present, for example, when some 7.5 months later, Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee met to map their strategy for engaging the army of General Joseph Hooker at Chancellorsville. Simply stated, General Jackson, my plan is this. As you know, General Hooker has concentrated a large force here, outnumbering our combined force 2-1. Nevertheless, he can be beaten. Utilizing a small force of 10,000 men, I intend to open a diversionary action against Hooker's front. You, meanwhile, will take our main force and march secretly round to Hooker's right to execute a crushing roll straight up Hooker's right flank. Then, with Hooker's army in disarray, you and I will be free to concentrate our combined forces from our pet project, a lightning-swift invasion of Pennsylvania. Indeed, on May 1, 1863, General Lee and his small diversionary force noisily engaged General Hooker's vastly superior force in the thick woods near Chancellorsville. The Confederate main force, led by Stonewall Jackson, made a secret overnight march, and on the evening of May 2nd, launched a devastating surprise attack against General Hooker's exposed right flank. In the face of staggering, unexpected losses, the demoralized Federal Army was forced to undertake a panicky, full-scale retreat. A nearby corporal is surprised as Jackson hops into his saddle and draws his saber. "Where are you going, sir?" "What a silly question. I'm surprised you could even ask it. Why, I'm going to lead the pursuit, man. We've got to kill or capture as many of those Yankees as we possibly can before they have a chance to escape across the Rappahannock." "But, sir, it's safer at the rear. You shouldn't—" "Stuff it, Corporal. This is my finest hour, and I fully intend to savor every blessed moment of it." He charges towards the fighting. Meanwhile, several miles away, a dispatch rider reports to Lieutenant Hex that the Yankees were getting the stuffing kicked out of them at Chancellorsville. His troops hurriedly mount up to get in on the fun, but Hex intervenes. "Our orders are to stay right here and hold these positions." "All right, Lieutenant, but we can still set us up a little ambush over on that ridge, can't we? After all, at least a few of them blue bellies hightailing it away from Chancellorsville is bound to come galloping right down that pass." "Well, I suppose that'd be all right." Hex sends 3 men to stake out the north end and takes the rest himself to stake out the south end. Meanwhile, Jackson's troop wanders lost in the darkness after sunset. "Here we've just won this incredible triumph, and now we can't even find our way back to our own camp," he exclaims in frustration. They enter the south end of the pass and are seen by Hex and his men. In the darkness, Jackson's men are mistaken for Union soldiers. Hex takes aim at the leading horseman and fires. Jackson goes down, and the rest of Hex's men open fire on the remainder of the soldiers, knocking several from their mounts. And back to the present again. "That was an exciting story, Granddad, but it still doesn't explain why Jonah Hex—" "I'm getting to that, youngster. You see, I guess just about every schoolboy, north or south, has read how old Stonewall Jackson was shot and killed by accident by his fellow Confederates right after he'd went and won that big victory over at Chancellorsville. But I guess what not everybody knows is that Stonewall Jackson was shot and killed by Jonah Hex himself. As they watch, Jonah Hex mounts his steed, salutes, and rides off. The end.
Joy. History Minute. Thomas Stonewall Jackson, January 21st, 1824 to May 10th, 1863, was a Confederate general and military officer who served during the American Civil War. He played a prominent role in nearly all military engagements in the Eastern Theater of the war until his death. Military historians regard him as one of the most gifted tactical commanders in U.S. history. Born in what was then part of Virginia, now in West Virginia, Jackson received an appointment to the United States Military Academy, West Point, graduating in the class of 1846, 17th out of 59. He served in the U.S. Army during the Mexican-American War, distinguishing himself at the Battle of Chapultepec. In 1851 to 1861, he taught at the Virginia Military Institute. When Virginia seceded from the United States in May of 1861 after Fort Sumter, Jackson joined the Confederate Army. He distinguished himself commanding a brigade at the First Battle of Bull Run in July, providing crucial reinforcements and beating back a fierce Union assault. Thus, General Barnard E. Bee compared him to a stone wall, which became his enduring nickname, though there's actually some argument as to whether or not it was a compliment or a complaint, because Bee was mortally wounded almost as soon as he said it. Jackson performed exceptionally well in various campaigns over the next 2 years. On May 2nd, 1863, as Jackson and his staff were returning to camp after scouting the results of the rout of Federal forces at the Battle of Chancellorsville, sentries of the 18th North Carolina Infantry Regiment mistook the group for a Union cavalry force. The sentries shouted, "Halt, who goes there?" but fired before evaluating the reply. Jackson was hit by 3 bullets, 2 in the left arm, 1 in the right hand. Several of Jackson's men and many horses were killed in the attack. He lost his left arm to amputation, and it was buried at the Elwood Family Cemetery at Spotsylvania Courthouse, Virginia. Confederate General Robert E. Lee wrote Jackson after learning of Jackson's injuries, stating, "Could I have directed events, I would have chosen for the good of the country to be disabled in your stead." Jackson died of complications from pneumonia on May 10, 1863, 8 days after he was shot. Jackson's fatal bullet was withdrawn, examined, and found to be .67 caliber, a type in service with the Confederate forces. Union troops in the area were using .58 caliber balls. This is one of the first instances of forensic ballistics identification derived from a firearm projectile. Jackson's death proved a severe setback to the Confederacy. That lightning swift invasion Pennsylvania Lee was talking about on page 12, panel 5? Gettysburg. Think Jackson would have come in handy there? After his death, his military exploits developed a legendary quality, becoming an important element of the pseudo-historical ideology of the lost cause. He's buried in Oak Grove Cemetery in Lexington, Virginia. Check the album for both grave markers, his actual one and the one for his arm. So the death panel on page 2, panel 2, page 17 is inaccurate because he lived for 8 days after being shot. Okay, I know, for the sake of the story. Still, no sentries call out to Jackson's group on page 16. And on panel 4, Jackson is hitting his right arm, not his left. Speaking of being hit, on page 4, panel 1, Jackson is clutching his left shoulder. On page 6, panel 3, he's clutching his right shoulder. We talked a bit about Harper's Ferry in WW281. Hex identifies himself as being assigned to the 7th Confederate Cavalry on page 7, panel 2. And that unit was assigned to Jackson's command, although it wasn't at Chancellorsville. But Hex had been pulled for duty with Jackson for the sake of the story earlier. And Jackson's salute is pure ass. Civil War era saluting was very similar to the British style saluting with the palm out. Jackson's salute is modern-ish. His fingers aren't lined up to where they should go, eyebrow, brim of the cap, etc. This is really why I lost the war. The terrain throughout the story strikes me as being too out west for this one. That waterfall Hex goes over, pretty sure there wasn't one of those near Harper's Ferry. And if there was, Hex sure as hell should have been told about it. Intel failure, page 9, panel 2. Jeff Davis is obviously a reference to Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States of America. Page 10, panel 5. The sentry calls Hex a Johnny. Johnny Reb and Billy Yank were 2 nicknames the combatants had for each other. Saving the best for last here. General Joseph Hooker as new commander of the Army of the Potomac in early 1863, encouraged prostitutes to visit the troops as a morale measure and reportedly used their services liberally himself. His name has become associated with the profession, hookers girls, or hookers. You're welcome.
All right, it's just hard to follow that up, as it often is. But we're talking about a grave site for a single arm, and then the origin of the word hooker, which I just learned right now. I never knew that. All right, so again, another amazing Killjoy History Minute, which I don't read before we record. So that was a blast for me, like it is probably for all of you hearing it for the first time. So it falls to me, though, to try to follow it up by kicking off our comments and commendations. And I'm going to keep this part relatively short for me because I go on for a bit in my last words. So here we go. Holy Confederate apologist comic book Batman. I suppose the way the flashback narrative of this story is delivered makes a certain kind of sense, given that it's narrated to a young boy by an older man who obviously sees the outcome of the Civil War as a aforementioned lost cause for the Confederates. But man, oh man, was this not the Jonah Hex comic book I was expecting to read? For reasons that like I said, I'll get into later in this episode. I was expecting an action-packed, gritty as all get out, grim tale of revenge on the old frontier. What I got was an exposition-heavy commercial for how great a man Stonewall Jackson was, and how tragic a mistake it was for Jonah Hex to accidentally shoot that great man dead. Blah. Granted, the work on display in these pages is frequently impressive, as can be seen on the entirety of the excellent opening splash page. Just that's going to be in the album, folks. It's awesome looking. Again, I was on high spirits going from that cover to that splash page. The way they lettered Stonewall, everything about it is cool. And the action scenes that we are treated to are depicted well. Even if the actual moment of the waterfall falls pretty short of the one depicted on LD's cover, it still works. The way the page is designed, like, yeah, it's a much farther away shot, but the way that whole scene going down the river and going over the waterfall happens is still really cool. Again, the artwork in here does not disappoint for the most part when it matters. But however, too much of this comic book is squarely devoted to what seems like an attempt to make us feel sad that a great hero like Stonewall Jackson was killed. Now, and a lot of it is like just panel after panel of exposition too, and just big speechifying going on. It's some of it looks like a very bad Classics Illustrated. Other pages are really cool. So it really divided me reading through it. I'm not sure if I bought this issue back in the day, but if I did, I highly doubt that I would have finished reading it. Now, I appreciate the birthday surprise, Rich, but this comic book in particular isn't strictly a winner for me. It did, however, as we're going to get into later, inspire a late night of long overdue research into the history of the Jonah Hex character, which, compared to the history of that character in my head and compared to the reality that I got a peek at reading this issue. So, you know me, even if the book itself wasn't a winner, if it gives me mileage to dive into the minutiae of comic book history, I'm a happy guy.
Sorry, Max. I know very little about the character and pretty much just scanned the title's cover gallery in GCD trying to make a selection. Although I killjoyed the splash page for its inaccurate portrayal of Jackson's marker, it's still a real good piece of work. Sunset, autumn, blowing leaves, Hex with hat in hand paying respects. A lot of my scene to see was already mentioned earlier, so this is going to be a real fast rundown. Page 3, panel 1. Hex dropping 2 into the forehead of a Union soldier at point blank range. Page 9, panel 5. The silhouetted fall of Hex out of the canoe as he goes over the head wall, berating Jackson is kind of funny. Page 13, panel 3. Is that Union soldier's head on fire? The very last panel of Hex riding off saluting is pretty good too. See? Told you be a fast rundown.
All right, CNC out of the way, we are heading over to the Daily Planet Extra insert here for the return, on the show anyway, of the Hembeck strip. This one is a 4-panel strip with Green Arrow and the Flash having a conversation. First panel, Green Arrow says, "Flash, there's one thing that's been bothering me for years. How come I, of all people, had a sidekick named Speedy instead of you?" And Flash answers, "Because if you had a sidekick named Kid Flash, It would have been really silly, wouldn't it? Flash walks away and Green Arrow looks out at us and goes, "Oh." Now, there's the real reason why Green Arrow had a sidekick named Speedy and Flash didn't. That real reason is that Speedy came along in 1941 and Kid Flash debuted in 1959. So by the time they were going to give the Barry Allen Flash, who didn't even exist in 1941, a sidekick, Speedy was already taken. The other, more retroactive reason is Roy Harper, Speedy, ended up being outed in the 70s as a heroin addict. So perhaps the name was a bit prophetic as well as just, predating Kid Flash. So there's that too.
Guess wasn't in the Grand Comics database. Guess what is now? A Henbeck strip and a Max birthday episode. That figures. Happy birthday, buddy. So that brings us to our spotlighted ads. And yeah, I think I got the winner of the book here. Acme Boots, aka the Saga of Johnny West. On the inside front cover, we have a 10-panel comic style ad. We start with Johnny West sitting high on a fence as the sun sets behind him on a mountain range. Johnny West, wearing his Acme boots, keeps an eye out for kids in trouble. One day after school, Johnny West sees a red-headed kid bullying a smaller boy. "Scram, kid! I'm borrowing your horse!" The bully runs off as Johnny West approaches. "Gee, Johnny West," the boy says, "I wish I could stand up to trouble like you." Johnny West offers the kid a pair of cowboy boots. "You can, by standing proud in Acme boots." The kid sits down on the sidewalk and slides them on. "Wow, Acme boots!" "You bet," Johnny West says. "Acme is making the great Western boots." The next day, it's a different story as the bully runs away from the suddenly confident kid. The kid is surrounded by other kids. "Wow, how did you scare that big creep off?" Then we get a close-up of the grateful kid like, "Thanks, Johnny West," as Johnny West walks off in the sunset, tipping his hat. Acme wins again. And we finish with two boots with the logo and tagline that Johnny West said earlier. Acme's making the great Western boots. Nitpicks first. Johnny just happened to have a pair of boots on him that were the kid's size. Where were they hiding? His holsters? And we all know the bully would be like, "Nice boots. I'll take those and the horse." Pow! I don't know if I've ever seen this ad before, but it's fitting being in a Western book. Johnny West was a 12-inch tall American cowboy action figure and the central character of the Lewis Marks Company's Best of the West 6th scale toy line. The line was produced from 1965 till 1976, so it ended when this book was out, and featured a number of characters based on American Old West motifs, utilizing a wide range of outfit and accessory pieces. Marks introduced Johnny West in 1965, manufacturing the cowboy virtually unchanged for the next decade. It was released a year after the debut of their Stony Smith U.S. military action figure that was put out to compete with Hasbro's G.I. Joe and used an identical likeness to Stony. The basic Johnny West figure was constructed of solid body parts that were injection molded in caramel brown polyethylene plastic. Ah, the 60s. With head and hands made from a softer, more pliable, flesh-colored PVC material. The parts were then fastened together to create a highly posable form with articulating legs and arms. A quick draw version of the figure was marketed for a couple of years at the end of the line starting in 1975. It featured a raising right arm and activated by a lever on the back and a special holster that allowed a pistol accessory to be drawn. The deluxe version was cast in blue plastic. Now, I never had this toy and I never wore the boots. It's entirely possible the toy has nothing to do with the boots and Johnny West is just a slick character name Acme used. But I found it while looking for potential product placement, so I added it here. And Acme Boots was founded in 1929 in Tennessee and was the world's largest manufacturer of cowboy boots from the 1940s to the mid-1980s, specializing in mass-produced, affordable Western footwear, including the famous Dingo line. They're currently owned by Berkshire Hathaway under the double label H brand label. I would be utterly remiss if I didn't drop a Wile E. Coyote Acme catalog reference here also. This wasn't bad at all.
Yeah, I was waiting. Like, oh, okay, you saved the Acme Coyote reference for the end. Okay, good. You got that covered. But yeah, people, that was the absolute only choice for an actual ad in this issue. It's a classic. It's fantastic. I didn't know anything about Acme being such a prominent company in the boot space, and I didn't know a thing about Johnny West, the action figure character. So cool ad, even by itself. But with the extra stuff Rich found out, yeah, that's the champ. So but me, I went for what I thought was at least a fun house ad for Jonah Hex subscription. Because, like I'm about to get into, this book kind of conflicted with the Jonah Hex I expected to read. But you can see that character on display in this ad for a subscription to 12 issues of Jonah Hex for the price of 10. Now, top part of the ad is Jonah standing there, both guns drawn, knees bent, shooting a bunch of cans flying around. I don't know why he's so mad at these cans, but you can maybe go back and ask Steve Martin from the movie The Jerk why this guy is so mad at these cans. It's a great drawing of Hex. And he's, like I said, one can says 12 issues for the price of 10. The other one says 2 free issues in case you don't get it. And the other says mailed flat in a heavy wrapper, which I find very important information because a lot of comic subs back in the day were mailed with the comic literally folded in half. So you got your comic, but it was like creased down the middle. So the fact that these were mailed flat in a heavy wrapper is kind of unusual for this era of comic subscriptions. Now, while he's blasting away, Jonah Hex is saying, listen, Sidewinders, nobody outguns me, but here's your chance to try to beat me out of 2 issues on the Jonah Hex magazine. I dare you. It says, now you too can take on Jonah Hex. And at the bottom, next to the card you're going to fill out to get you your 12 issues for the price of 10, it says, I've got the guts to beat Jonah Hex out of 2 issues. Here's my money for 10 issues, and he's got to send me 12. Ha! Now, it's not that complicated an ad, but it captures more the spirit that I have remembered in my head of Jonah Hex, where it's like, he's a tough talking jerk, and you're laughing in his face saying, I'm getting my 2 free issues. It's a great drawing. It's a fun house ad. And the fact that they mailed Jonah Hex flat to people. I mean, I'd have to look into how often DC was doing this by then. But from everyone I knew who actually did a direct comic subscription back in the day, you got your comic folded in half by both of these companies. So maybe they just started it in 1980. I mean, this is getting on in years here. This is one of the more recent comics we've covered that isn't like from the 2000s or something. So who knows? But hey, great drawing of Hex, blasting away at some cans, fun ad, and a pretty good deal. So we got the ads and the content of the comic book out of the way. Let me take a deep breath and ask myself if I've got any last words. And boy, do I. First up, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. I'll mention here and provide the links to some of the main sources I used to resolve my soul searching that was inspired by my reactions to the actual experience of reading this issue. There is a great, extensive series of blog entries that puts a timeline to Hex's fictional life, and I've singled out a link to the entry in that series that is most germane to this particular issue of Jonah Hex that we've covered in this episode, as well as a link to the beginning of Susan's, her name is Susan, who writes the blog, excellent series of posts on Hex. This will take you a long time to read, but if you're interested in getting it all in order in one place, this is the blog to read. Something else to help me out is the far more concise and extremely on point Comics Journal article from pretty recently, 2021, entitled Asshole in a Hat by Tom Shapira. That article gets into the debate between the original Albano written Hex and the later Fleischer written Jonah Hex, and from which I will spotlight a few excerpts that strongly resonated with me in regard to my conflict between the Hex I remember and the Hex that seems to mostly have actually existed in DC Comics. Some of those choice paragraphs go like this. Albano's Jonah doesn't really have a backstory. No past nor future. Even the Confederate background developed by later writers is nothing but a suggestion drawn from the character design. Hex might have just stolen that gray coat, or it might just be a random coat that looks like a uniform a bit. If he has any ideas about the shape of these United States, Hex doesn't share them with the readers or other characters. Actions speak louder than words, of course, and are far more exciting to look at. These early Jonah Hex stories are all about the excitement. And the article goes on to say Fleischer adds more and more history to Hex, but none of it makes him more compelling. Call it the Wolverine effect, if you will. And I happen to agree with that statement. Let's add more detail to Wolverine's life. Please don't. Nor does it better explain his actions throughout past and future tales. Another excerpt here. The joy of the early Jonah Hex stories are in their simplicity and straightforwardness. Done in one tales of brutality, stripped down to the very essential nature of the Western story formula. Fleischer attempts to build up on these foundations, not realizing that everything he adds to the character is unnecessary. Again, in Tom Shapira's opinion, and likely mine, his attempts to engage with larger themes are embarrassing at best, ugly at worst, and in the manner of 20th century Westerns that realize that maybe what the settlers did to Native Americans was wrong, but can only come out with some mealy mouthed, both sides should stop the violence content. Now, I gotta say, even though the Fleischer Hex is the one I doubtlessly grew up with, that's the one that existed for the longest period of time when I was a kid. I know I had many of the early Albano issues gathered from yard sales in my youth, and looking back on it now, I vastly prefer the more primal and mysterious Hex to the overly lore laden and morally awkward version that was built up by Fleischer. I'm especially thankful, as I mentioned, for Shapira's use of the term the Wolverine effect in that Comics Journal article, as that tends to be my stance on the character too these days, having largely rejected myself the Origin series that turned Logan into James Howlett. Ugh. But more recently, having come to even roll my eyes at many of Chris Claremont's add-ons to the character, like Logan's Samurai period and other things. But that is all best left for another podcast. More to the point, there's a new Jonah Hex series coming soon from DC right now. And in the wake of that news, the debate online over whether or not Jonah should still wear his Confederate coat has come back into fashion. Now, I know, especially right now, the official reasons for Jonah's continued donning of that particular garment have ranged from it being a reminder of his past mistakes to it serving as bait to lure out racists in need of eliminating. But I don't buy either of those in this day and age. The real reason the coat is still around is that it's part of Hex's trademarkable or copyrightable or whatever character design, as if Hex's unjustifiably scarred face isn't distinctive enough. But corporation gonna corporation. And regarding that scar, sure, it is cool looking, but it's also dumb for Hex to not just cut that string of skin across his mouth? It ain't holding his bottom jaw up, is it? It also doesn't pass muster to have him keep it the way it is as any reminder, since he knows it was given to him unfairly, unlike his at first willing choice to join the Confederate Army. Again, the story behind that scar in Fleischer's later fleshing out is that Jonah was raised by Indians. He left to join the army. He went back to see his people back at the tribe he used to hang out with. And he has a feud with his brother and kills his brother in the feud. And then they use a technicality saying, you're not supposed to kill any Native American, so we have to scar you. And so they give him the devil's mark, and that's how he gets his scar. It's all very convoluted and extra. There's no reason for him to keep that scar. He knows that even his people that he once respected and grew up with gave him that scar unfairly. So you'd think he'd do something with it. But again, adding all that story just adds more questions to the character that keep him from making a lot of sense. Again, though, it all just comes down to actionable IP and the poor underpaid writers who need to somehow come up with in-story reasons to justify the continuation of such things. Because what if Hex did change his scar? Well, then just a scarred face is not something you can claim trademark to. A lot of people have scarred faces, but particularly I think it's that string of flesh over his mouth that keeps it in the, that's Jonah Hex, that's ours, you can't use that territory. So I think what I've learned from covering this issue is that the Jonah Hex I hold dear in my mind, such that it is, existed briefly in the early Albano written stories, partially in the spooky Truman tales that Rich mentioned, and really mostly in my own imaginary head canon. I also, again, this adds to it. I also really enjoyed the Palmiotti and Gray written series that Rich mentioned, the 2006 reboot, I believe, of more recent years, which, if I recall correctly, what are the odds though, acknowledged or at least tipped the hat toward all the Fleischer-laden lore, but made much better hash out of it all. Or, from what I remember, didn't really get into all that. It what kind of went back to that formula of like Hex is a badass traveling the country, hunting down bounties. The people he hunts and sometimes the people he hires or who hire him are all terrible. It kind of got back into that Albano feel from what I remember. But again, I don't know how much I can trust that anymore. Somewhere in that sloppy soup of a stew, there somehow remains a deeply embedded, if perhaps largely misguided, love of the character for me. I mean, I even have an awesome original sketch of the character drawn by the legendary Sam Glanzman himself, gifted to me by his widow and friend of the show, Sue, to prove it. And there's going to be a picture of that amazing sketch I was given. And that ain't nothing, folks. And before I let Rich finally re enter the show here, something else I discovered when I was digging around about Jonah Hex and this issue in particular, some bonus trivia about writer Michael Fleischer. And here we go. Writer Harlan Ellison, kind of a big deal in science fiction circles, in a 1979 interview praised Fleischer's comics work, while also describing Fleischer and his work as crazy, certifiable, twisted, derango, bugfuck, and a lunatic. He also claimed that a Publisher's Weekly review called Fleischer's novel, Chasing Harry, the product of a sick mind, and that Fleischer's Spectre run on Adventure Comics had been discontinued by DC because the company, quote, realized they had turned loose a lunatic on the world. While Ellison later stated that some of what he was claiming was said in some humor, Fleischer, saying his business reputation had been destroyed and believing he was falsely portrayed as insane, filed a $2 million libel suit against Harlan Ellison, publisher Gary Groth, and the magazine in which the interview appeared, The Comics Journal, which is where my asshole in a hat article was later published in 2021. So a little circular kind of motion here, history repeating itself. The case came to court in 1986 and guess what? Resulted in a verdict for the defendants. But nice try, Mike.
What? Back to the show. Happy belated birthday, Max. Though I dare say an early August release of your birthday issue is closer to your actual birthday than one that would have been dropped in early July. My heart was in the right place, at least. An all DC Civil War episode, if you count the intel report. The fratricide of Stonewall Jackson is the most famous such case of the Civil War. But I picked up Friendly Fire in the Civil War by Webb Garrison. There's a name. Earlier this year that documents over 150 true stories of comrade killing comrade. Friendly Fire ain't, as the saying goes. As I said earlier, I have a few Jonah Hex books, but they're all from the 90s on. This is the first book from this early I've gotten, and I'm game to get more. The last Hex book I bought before this one was that Yosemite Sam Jonah Hex special from 2017 that was amazing. That wasn't a typical Hex book, and neither is this one. So I don't have a whole lot to compare it to, but I still liked it.
I mean, publication wise, until the Palmiotti and Gray series, actually, the Fleischer issue we just read was a typical Hex book because he had the longest run on the character out of anyone. So, it's just not typical in the way I think me and some other fans have carried that character's memory forward. And yes, I will second the mention of the Yosemite Sam Jonah Hex special. So, a few of those crossovers were so much better than they had any right to be. Like some of them weren't like but some of them the creators really dug their heels in and made something out of those crossovers, those little specials, and that was one of them. Man, that will probably be on the DC app, even though the Jonah Hex series itself isn't yet, as I found out. But they probably have that because it's like a crossover with Yosemite Sam. So I'm gonna reread that today if I can. Yeah, no need to apologize for picking this issue. I had a blast doing the research, getting like the wake up call of like this issue compared to my memories of Jonah Hex. Like this is the kind of stuff I sort of started this show for, like came to you and said, let's start a show, is to go back through a series that I have super fond memories of, Weird War Tales, and see how it pans out if we read it all again. So this is right in line with the mission, in my opinion. And we got a Luis Dominguez cover out of it too, thanks to you. So fits in so perfectly. But, you know, I've probably done enough talking at this point for a side mission. So I'll move us mercifully along to the scuttlebutt and I'll try to keep that fast. Here we go. Scuttlebutt, Facebook page, Weird Warriors podcast. Go to it. It's cool. Sam stars. You can earn them two ways. You can buy merch on redbubble.com with our Bill Walco drawn and designed kick-ass logo on that merch. Send a picture of it to the Facebook page on the messenger. You'll get a Sam star. Or if you can killjoy me 3 times, only 3. Come on, you could probably do that in one episode and send that in to Rich at the Facebook page. You'll also get a Sam star. We got a YouTube page. I have been working on it in a while, but there's a bunch of episodes up on it. Go listen to them there and shame me for how close I've gotten and then stopped adding episodes to it. That's my part of the scuttlebutt. I said I would be fast. I am done.
Because he's been talking a long time. So anyway, moving on to the teaser Max thought he was going to be getting last time around, because this is literally the words he saw on the bottom of the script. Weird War Tales number 83, Israeli Sleeper Agent, African Demons, the most predictable story ending in show history. See you in 30.
Man, that last bit's a tall order. I can't wait. The most predictable story ending in Weird War Tales history? That is no small claim. All right, people?
Trust me, by panel 2, you know where it's freaking going.
Excellent. I can't wait. Refreshing. So there you go, people. You'll have to wait till next time to hear how predictable that story ending is. And you'll hear it from us. And who are we? Hey, we're Max and Rich. We're the Batlin Bros. We are the Weird Warriors. We host a show, as you may have figured out, that's called the Weird Warriors Podcast. And that podcast is one on which Rich and I, we promise to make war
no more. Dong diddle-long, 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 diddle-long.
Perfect.